Sheba Karim's second YA novel, That Thing We Call a Heart, received a starred review from Kirkus and features young love, Radiohead, Urdu poetry, and pie, thus the pie in the back. Her third YA novel, The Road Trip Effect, about three best friends on a road trip through the American South, will be out in 2018. She has an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Find her at Sheba Karim or on the web at www.shebakarim.com. Also, everyone here tonight is on Twitter. So if you guys want to send any questions there or engage in conversation, don't be shy, send your questions, and retweet afterwards. I'm like plugging in everything. All right, everyone, round of applause, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to read an excerpt from That Thing We Call a Heart. Just a bit about the book. The protagonist's name is Shabnam Qureshi, and she's a Pakistani-American teenager. And there's a few different plot threads in the book that all come together and intersect. One is that she has a best friend named Farah who starts wearing the hijab, and Shabnam has a hard time with that and how she comes to terms with that. Another is that she starts working at a pie shack and falls in love for the first time with a boy named Jamie. And another is that she has sort of estranged relationship with her father, who's a mathematician and a bit awkward. And over the course of this summer, he's really into Urdu poetry, and she starts bonding with her father over Urdu poetry, which is all about longing and distance and desire and the beloved and the lover. So as she learns about Urdu poetry from her father, it sort of informs her first love with Jamie. And also Urdu poetry draws a lot of inspiration from mystical Sufi Islam, so you'll see that referenced in this reading. So I'm going to read a passage where she has a late night conversation with her father. I grabbed the last 2 donuts, made 2 cups of tea, and knocked on my father's study, where I'd noticed the light was on. Entry, my father said. I assumed he meant enter and stepped inside. I hadn't been in his study in years. Besides my bedroom, it was the only other space my mother didn't clean with her usual obsessive regularity. It smelled like old socks and Old Spice. There were papers everywhere, some stapled, some loose, some circularly imprinted by mugs, some bearing stains as yellow as urine. The wastebasket was overflowing. One wall had floor-to-ceiling built-in shelves, the lowest shelf home to a collection of leather-bound Encyclopedia Britannicas, coated with a layer of dust you could spell your name in. The rest filled with books in Urdu and English in disorderly stacks. The recliner was similarly besieged, piled nearly to the top with books. I paused, uncertain where to put his teacup. His desk was so cluttered, you couldn't tell what it was made of. Here, I said, handing the cup to my father, who set it down without even bothering to look. Is this a ye old donut? My father asked. Don't tell Mom. My father didn't reply. His mouth was already full. I started removing books from the leather recliner so I could sit. Underneath the last book, a bright yellow math text called An Introduction to Knot Theory, was a highly fragrant brown and red striped sock. Dad, I said, holding the sock up and away, this is disgusting. What is? He asked. Never mind, I said, opening the door and tossing it into the den for my mother to deal with later. It's a wonder Mom hasn't murdered you, you know. Your mother abhors violence. I didn't mean it literally. Even so, the impossibility of the stated action undermines the efficacy of the hyperbole. My father said this in English, the language he used for such complex sentences, though that might have also have been because I lacked the capacity to understand it in any other tongue. Yeah, okay, listen, I have a question. My father still had 1 bite of donut left. If he really liked something, he'd inhale it, then hold off on the last bite, reluctant to finish, though I'd never seen this reluctance last more than a minute. Yes, my father said. I hesitated. Was it wise to ask whether my father loved my mother? What did it matter? Even if he said yes, it wouldn't turn him into some expressive romantic or even a normal guy. And what if he said no? What the hell would I do then? Did I really want to know all the ways in which my parents' marriage was depressing? Maybe not, but I felt like I'd plunged past the point of no return. So, we've been talking about love and the lover and the beloved and longing and all that. And I was wondering if you love mom like that, I asked. My father blinked. Like what? I tried again, more simply. Do you love mom? Do I love your mother? Do you? My father glanced at the last bit of donut, debated, put it down on top of his keyboard, picked it up again, ate it. I made a mental note to buy a keyboard cleaner. Yes, he said, I love your mother. Like the lover loves his beloved? That kind of love is for Sufi mystics, my father said, and poetry. That kind of love cannot be sustained between two mortals. Why not, I asked. Because the love of the Sufi mystics, the love the poet's mirror, is divine love. Humans are terribly flawed. Humans hurt each other. Humans become bored. Humans become sick. Humans are weak. When you are consumed by human love, it is like looking into a fire of your own making. You believe you are seeing your beloved, but it is a mere reflection of the intensity of your own emotion. When that fire cools, your beloved's true face, flawed, hopelessly mortal, is revealed. The only beloved who will not disappoint when you see his true face is Allah, because he is the source of all love, all light. I thought you were an atheist. I never said I was an atheist. So you believe in Allah? That is a very complex question for such a late hour, though it is perhaps the most appropriate time to discuss such matters. But I was finally starting to feel sleepy, and we were on the precipice of a long and potentially long-winded, one-sided dialogue. Okay, well, back to your love for mom. So you're saying you can't really love a human because they will disappoint you. No, I am differentiating the love for the divine with the love for mortals. So you love mom like a mortal. Yes. meaning you know she will disappoint you because she's not Allah. Of course she will disappoint me. She is human. We are all flawed. It is the opposite. I don't expect her not to disappoint me. I don't expect not to disappoint her. I don't expect her to be Allah. That is the whole point. Okay, I get that two humans in love are inevitably going to disappoint each other. But I think you need to try harder not to disappoint her, I said. I don't understand. Why don't you help her with the dishes, buy her flowers, mow the lawn before she asks you without all your usual drama? It's really not that hard, Dad. I've mowed the lawn twice. I could see my father's face glazing over, as it did when my mother admonished him, and snapped my fingers in front of his face. He flinched, his glasses slipping off one ear. I'm serious, I told him. I know your love is pragmatic, but you should still tell her you love her, show her you care. But she knows I care. Really? I didn't think you cared about me until recently, and you definitely don't care about a lot of things that concern me. What concerns you? My father said. My mother may never murder him, but sometimes I thought I definitely could. Even the fact you have to ask that. Okay, what grade did I get in pre-calculus? D, my father ventured. A D? I know I'm not a math genius like you, but really? I got a B+, thank you very much. Anyway, my point is, pardon my French, but love means sometimes acting like you give a shit. My father frowned. That's English, not French. If I stayed, I was liable to hurl an Encyclopedia Britannica in his direction. Plus, I wasn't sure I could keep my eyes open much longer. I'm going to bed, I stated, and your glasses are crooked. But I still couldn't sleep, this time wondering why love was so confusing. Why I usually felt my very best with Jamie, but today I didn't like how I'd acted after Farah left, jealous, dishonest. I guess I'd assumed love equaled joy. I hadn't realized love might bring out the worst in you, too. Hugging Big Muchly close, I closed my eyes and remembered how passionately we'd kissed in the van, how we'd played chopstick wars at the amazing Chinese restaurant, and how it made me so happy to keep my foot against his leg the whole meal, how for once Jamie had done most of the talking. He told me how, when his father left them, Jamie had burned all of his photos, then swept up the remnants and stored them in his piggy bank because he felt guilty, how his father died in a motorcycle accident a few months later, how he still had the piggy bank with his father's photographic ashes. Hearing this, I wanted to cross the table and embrace him, comfort that sad, sweet, guilty little boy inside, kiss his hurt away, assure him everything would be all right, that I was there for him, always. I offered him a shrimp dumpling instead, except it fell off my chopsticks onto his lap. Jamie said, "Missed connection," and even though I laughed, my heart ached a little because we talked about our fathers, but we still hadn't talked about us, and we were running out of time. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so we're moving to the Q&A now. We're just asking to keep your questions Twitter-sized. And when we also bring the mic back and forth for the Q&A, please wait for the mic and speak into it because we're live streaming.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sona Charaipotra. I'm the co-author of Tiny Pretty Things and Shiny Broken Pieces, and also the co-founder of Cake Literary, which is a book packager. And so I'm going to be moderating today, and I want my panelists to introduce themselves briefly and tell us how they got on their path to writing and how they ended up where they are today. And Sheba, I'm going to ask you first to also address the book specifically and where it sort of came from too. It's probably muted.
Okay. So what am I saying? How I became a writer and my book?
Yeah, how you became a writer, your book, and I want to know specifically, like, where did all the pie come from?
So I was a lawyer first, and I'd always written as a child and loved writing, but had never, like others of you here, had parents who didn't view writing as a career, and so didn't imagine that I could ever be a writer. And then when I became a lawyer, I realized that I didn't want to be a lawyer, and that I'd always wanted to be a writer, and so I ended up going to an MFA program, and I've been writing ever since. And just that thing we call heart. My first novel, Skunk Girl, had a Pakistani American protagonist, so I obviously like to write about Pakistani Americans. And I'm also working on a historical fiction novel that's set in 13th century India, which got me researching a lot of Urdu poetry, so that's why there is Urdu poetry in this book. And in terms of pie, I don't know.
There's donuts too. Quite a
There's
few
pie
donuts.
and donuts.
Yes.
It's true. Yeah, I have a sweet tooth, obviously. So.
Madame Heidi.
Yeah. Oh. Hi. My name is Heidi Heilig. I am the author of The Girl from Everywhere and The Ship Beyond Time. And I came to writing through, I guess, musical theater. I wrote musical theater for a while, and I went to NYU for that, and that was a bad idea. But then I came to writing novels, and the books are about a half Chinese, half white girl like me who lives on a time-traveling pirate ship.
The lovely Emily.
Oh. I'm trying to figure out where this needs to go. Okay. My name is Emily XR Pan. My first book comes out next year. It's called The Astonishing Color of After. It's about a girl who her mother commits suicide and then turns into a bird. She goes off to Taiwan to try to find the bird. And I came to writing because, well, my mom is a writer. She writes in Chinese, and my dad has always been a storyteller, and kind of under their influence, even though they weren't supportive of me being a writer for a long time, under their influence, I had a love of stories that I couldn't get enough of.
And Wendy.
Hi guys, I'm Wendy Xu. I'm actually more of an illustrator than I am a writer, though I do write comics. I mostly do comics. Right now I have a webcomic called Mooncakes. It's about a Chinese American witch and werewolf. And I also have a series about a man with a pigeon head. Who's half Chinese.
Tell them what it's called.
Oh, his name is Terry Shin. He's half Chinese and half Korean, and he's cursed to have a pigeon head. And that's just on Twitter. It's just on my Twitter. I came into comics through manga. Like, I read so much manga growing up as a kid. and I started drawing it when I was in high school, and I've been drawing it ever since.
Cool. So today, our agenda is to sort of discuss Asian American writing in the YA space. And so there's still not a lot of it, but we wanted to kind of take a look at what we are seeing now that's sort of coming up. And so to that end, I wanted to ask you guys, what was the first reflection of yourself that you saw in fiction or in media overall? Because for me, it wasn't until I was about 20 years old. So that was a long time. Who wants to start?
Growing up, there were no reflections. I remember there's Rudyard Kipling, which has nothing to do with my personal life, but was India related. There was that guy in Short Circuit too, who was Indian, but wasn't even Indian really.
That happened a lot.
Yeah, there was Apu and The Simpsons. That was the 90s. So I was in my 20s before I really saw like a South Asian American story, either in film or in book form.
So for me, I'm 37 now, so I was actually like 34, 35 before I saw a half Chinese, half white girl, and it was actually written by a fellow debut that year. Her name's Callie Wallace. She is not, she's, I believe, white, but she's not Hapa, I know that. But yeah, she just threw that in there, and I was like, whoa. So it was kind of like I wrote the book where I wanted to see, I guess why I wanted to see myself. I grew up in Hawaii. The first book is set in Hawaii. It deals with a lot of like my feelings about like not having seen, not knowing where I sort of fit. So it took a really long time.
My first memory of seeing an Asian character in books was Claudia in the Babysitter's Club. And she really spoke to me because, she was obsessed with like hoarding candy in her room, and she read Nancy Drew novels nonstop, and she had like all white friends. And I was like, she's basically me, except she's Japanese American and I'm Taiwanese/Chinese American. But I never, like, she was never a big enough character for me. I was always like, I need more Claudias, and I need them to always be the main character, and I need there to be stories that just completely revolve around them. And it definitely took until I was an adult to start to see that. Yeah, I remember even like as a kid, we were tweeting about this, like when Mulan came out, I was like, yay, Chinese character, but also I'm a little bit confused by a lot of the elements here. And also like being Asian American is such a different experience. So I'm still craving more of that.
Just so you know, my daughter is now reading The Babysitter's Club, and Claudia is her fave. And she's reading it because Mama used to read it. Okay, Wendy, you're up.
When I was 8, I was watching like a VHS of some Disney movie, and then the previews were on, and it was for Mulan, and like that was literally the first time like I was like, oh my god. I never really thought about it. Like I watched it and I liked it, but I think the story that really stuck with me was when I went to high school and I read Amy Tan. And I am not the biggest fan of Amy Tan now and as an adult, but in high school that was some pretty formative stuff for me.
So I have a leading question because this is sort of leading off the previous question. Why do you write for children and teens specifically? And also, did you know that's what you were doing when you started? Because some people don't. Let's start with Wendy this time.
Oh my god, you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
I really like children's films. I grew up watching a lot of Hayao Miyazaki. I think Spirited Away. Like I still rewatch his films constantly. And I think there's something so special about that kind of finding yourself story. That kind of like, who am I? What's my identity? That is so integral to so many of these young adult / middle grade stories. that it's just so fun to explore.
I read and write pretty widely across all age groups and all genres, but I come back again and again to children's books and YA books because and those books are still to this day my favorites. And I think it's because I can remember the magic of reading them and being so in love with a world, even if it's not like a fantasy world, even like a world just in a book, and feeling depressed that I wasn't living in that world. And that's kind of what I keep with me now when I write. I like want to create, I strive to create that in my writing. And so even though I also write adult stuff, I gravitate again and again towards the feeling of being a teenager and reading that, and that manifests in like my characters.
Yeah, for me, the most, I think, life-changing experiences I had were when I was a teen. I'm also bipolar, and that's when that manifested. So like I felt like I was dealing with like the most like literally crazy things at that time in my life, and I was learning how to fall in love, which was like a huge thing for me, and like doing all this like and like learning how to deal with myself. And so I feel like maybe it's some of that trauma, and maybe it's some of that like passion and excitement that keeps drawing me back to that particular time period, I think.
Yeah, so when I had not thought of writing YA, and then when I started my MFA program, they offered an elective, a writing children's literature workshop, and that's when I started working on my first YA novel. And I think part of it is just I had such a longing growing up to see representations of myself that I think I was just answering that longing in writing the YA book. And also it was just it's such a fun time period to write about because you can go there, like the passion, the anger, everything can go, you don't have to hold back. And I just lost my train of thought, but so and reading YA when I was growing up, it was all these stories of who am I going to take to prom, and it was so fun to finally write the story of like, what if you're not allowed to go to fucking prom, right? Like, what do you do then? And so and there's still, even in 2017, there's still so few stories like that when you look at the whole of YA. And so there's still that need, and more of us are filling it. But yeah, we still have a long way to go.
I mean, like, my kid's 7, my older daughter, and she still rarely will see herself on the page, which is, 30 years after I had that experience. That's pretty tragic. So one of the things that came up earlier was this concept of Asian America, which is different than the broader scope of Asia, and the experiences are different, and diaspora is a very interesting place to be. Talk a little bit about that, because all our work sort of falls into diaspora more so than traditional Asia. Who wants to start this time? I think Heidi.
So I was joking earlier that I'm like the whitest person on the panel because I'm literally half white. So with the last name Heilig too, it's like I look like I should be carrying like 2 beer steins, like with big like blonde pigtails. But like, so I definitely do not feel like, I know we're going to talk a little bit about own voices later, but like I definitely don't feel like I could write a Chinese character with authority. I also don't feel like, I feel a little bit more like I know and have been exposed to the white experience so much. Some of my best friends are white, but like that I could write a white voice with more certainty. But especially for my first book, when I was just trying to really even discover how to write a novel, I did not know how to write a character that was that did not have time traveling, piracy aside, that did not have a very similar situation to myself, being like half white and like half Chinese and not really having connections to the Chinese side, and trying to discover them. So yeah, that's I guess where I'm most comfortable now. I don't know. My grandmother was always really sad that she came over her family came over, her grandparents came over, and they never taught their kids Chinese because at that time it was the assimilate. So she was always, whenever we would go to a restaurant, she would always ask, waiters if they spoke Chinese, and she would say, tell me the word for this, tell me the word for family, tell me the word for love, and she'd write them down so that she'd have them pronounce them many times so that she could learn some of her own culture. It was always a thing for her.
And you don't have to do like, you're sitting next to me, so you're next. Mix it up.
So I'll
Oh,
say
yeah,
something.
Wendy, go.
I grew up with a lot of witch stories. Like, I loved Harry Potter growing up. I loved The Worst Witch. And I love practical magic. But I always noticed that, like, those stories are so parallel to a lot of, like, my family structures. Like, with the witch stories, you always have, like, the aunties who are meddling. You'll always have, like, a girl who's kind of at odds with, like, you know, having these magical powers. And that kind of naturally integrated into what I'm interested in writing about, which has now become like witch aunties.
Best.
Yes. So, like, the American witch story to me already feels like a diaspora story because someone is struggling with their culture, but in a really fun and magical way. And so, as a child of immigrants, like, that's where I naturally want to go in my own work.
Come on, guys, duke it out.
Well, I guess I write for the kids who, like me, wanted more of the Claudias, and I feel like I had this weird experience of, I always grew up in totally white communities. I was always the token Asian kid, and when I got to college, I went to NYU, and I went to the business school, where white people are the minority. So it's super, super diverse. There were a ton of Asians, and I was like, I can have Asian friends now. And I started encountering this thing where people would be like, after you'd like pass the point of having to be polite, I would start to hear things like, oh yeah, at first we thought you were too white to be friends with us. And I was like, what does that mean? Because I'm not. I learned Mandarin before English. I speak Mandarin daily with my parents. I'm completely fluent, and like, even though I don't default to listening to all the Asian pop stars, I listen to American music. Like, we still have a shared context, but a lot of people wouldn't see that even like as Asian Americans. So that sort of difference of pockets of communities and like where we all fit in the Venn diagram, that was something I was constantly trying to navigate as I was like entering adulthood. And so I try to explore a lot of that in my writing too, because I feel like I haven't seen many books who deal with that specific issue.
Yeah, and I think it's I think we also have this burden of representation because there are so few.
That's the next question.
Next question.
Yeah.
Next segue. So I write about South Asian American characters and Muslim American characters, South Asian Muslims. And so because there's geography, there's cultural differences, there's linguistic differences, there's class differences. And so the other day I was thinking, there's such diversity within the Muslim community, and there's probably, I think I can count the number of Muslim YA authors on one hand.
Even South Asian authors
Yeah.
overall, there's,
Yeah.
2 hands maybe.
Yeah, right.
Less than 2 hands.
So I was thinking, in some ways, Shabnam might have more in common. She goes to like a nice private school, and she's middle class, and she lives in this suburb or this like cute town in New Jersey. And she might have more in common with a white girl living in a similar situation than, for example, a Muslim Somali teenage girl who's the daughter of refugees growing up in Minneapolis. And so it is really ironic that you are meant to be this voice representing like a Muslim American experience when there is no singular Muslim American experience or South Asian American experience. But because there's so few of us, you still end up on this soapbox, like speaking for the many, when each many has their own individual story.
So the next question was about the burden of representation and how much you feel it, because the thing is, there's so few of us being published, period, that each representation counts so much. But I think the sharpest knives that are thrown at us are from within our own communities. Address.
I definitely think this is something that I kind of end up obsessing over as I'm editing, how to most accurately represent my culture, my personal experience as an Asian American, and also like my family's culture, and who among my readers are going to take my expression as a statement of this is how people are, whether it's Taiwanese American or Taiwanese people or Chinese American, etc. And I worry about that a lot. And even within like my own family, there's a huge variation in what people believe and what customs people maintain. Like, I'm not even talking about like the difference between the paternal side and maternal side. Like within just my mom's side of the family, there's so much variation. So it's like, how could we ever expect any book to fully represent any one culture?
But we do, right?
This is why I write fantasy. So I can be like, it's a made-up country. Don't talk to me. But like on a more serious note, you know, I really have to turn that part of my brain off. Partially because it is fantasy. You know, like I write a lot of what's called secondary world fantasy, where it does not take place in this world. It takes place on another world. But a lot of the culture I pull from is kind of a combination of what I grew up with. So it is like, I would consider it, you know, diasporic fantasy. And in those worlds, like, I take inspiration from lots of different places. But I mostly just try to write figure out the story that I'm interested in telling, like what the world I want to build is about. And I will take like myth elements, but mostly I'm focused on like telling the story and trying to tune out everything else.
So I think the big problem is that there is just not enough. There's just not enough representation, and people are so starved to see themselves that, like, this is, I think we were talking about like Mulan, and I think someone else, either, I don't know if it was you, but we were talking about like Cho Chang, or like, you know, like just like seeing yourself, like wanting to see yourself, like painting a picture of this character that was really like, I mean, Cho Chang, like the name itself is like hard to even say, but like you want it to be something so bad, you're so hungry. And I think that the anger, even intra-community anger and frustration, comes from a place of hunger and starvation. And so I think that while I personally have like come to this sort of place of like, I will not ever like publicly say something about another author of color in a place where people, like the white gaze people, can pick it apart, because that is not something that I think that can be easily understood. I will just always say, like, we have to get more stories out there, and we all have to be working as hard as we can to write our stories. So, you know, cutting down another author of color just because they're not writing the story that you think should be written about the same type of person that you both are is like not, I don't think it's helpful. I think we just all need to be working as hard as we can to get our stories out there and to write, if you're writers out here, like to write your stories and get them out there. And if you're readers, to support those stories and read widely. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think that is always an issue when you write Muslim characters. And I particularly, so you got a sense of the father. Shabnam is not religious. Her best friend Farah is religious and starts wearing the hijab, but also is a punk rock feminist who smokes marijuana. So it's very, and I knew that there's always going to, when you write something like that, there's going to be some backlash from people within the Muslim community. And as an author, you're not supposed to read your reviews. But I peeked the other day, and there was this one Muslim reader who's upset and said, this book gives Islam a bad name. And then someone questioned her and said, I haven't read it, but you know, a lot of people practice Islam in different ways. Why do you think it gives it a bad name? And her response was, Shabnam is too liberal to be a Muslim. And which tells you a lot right there, just that statement. And
I see Natasha rolling her eyes right there. And did I call you out on it last time too? No. I'm sorry.
But as the eye roll indicates, it's something that Muslim artists and writers and creators have to deal with the backlash within our own community. And I know like, for example, there's a Islamic Society of North America, is the biggest Muslim convention in the U.S., and they have a whole like book expo with stalls with all these books, but they're all like halal books, and like there are a lot of books published by Muslim authors that would not be welcome there, including this. And it just comes with the territory. You just have to write the story you want to write, and have a thick skin.
That leads me to our next question, which is, so we were talking about Alex Tizan and the recent Atlantic article, which has touched a nerve with many people, and it's been a hot topic of discussion, especially on the Twitter. So tell me this. Are there things within your community experiences that you guys would not touch on because you're quote-unquote airing dirty laundry? Or would you go there? And then also, that ties into another aspect too, because back in the day, there used to be certain boundaries in YA that you couldn't touch either, and that seems to be shifting. Talk about that, everyone, please. I think we should start with you, Sheba, because you just were touching on this very subject.
So are there topics I wouldn't touch on?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could say maybe I wouldn't write a character who wants to...
Or are there topics you definitely want to touch on just to piss people off, too? That's the other aspect of it. Because I know Heidi will.
I would hesitate to write a character who's violent or wants to become a terrorist. But I don't think that can't be written. It's not something I'm very familiar with. I don't know any Muslims who are terrorists, and so
good.
You can quote me on that. But I do. You do kind of think when you write about a community that has such like limited representation. You don't want to not have a character be an ass if they're supposed to be an ass, but you also want all of them to be sort of empathetic because they're getting shat upon on Fox News like every day. So that definitely is a consideration, that even that the reader will have some empathy for them no matter what their characteristics are. And I don't know, in terms of the Atlantic article, I think that brought out the whole concept of, if you're writing about a family, like in South Asia, there's a similar thing where a lot of people have servants who are and maybe some of them don't get paid, and maybe some of them are ill-treated. And as that article showed, it's one of those things I think is very difficult to portray. And so I never even thought about writing that, but after reading that article, I was like, I will never write about this. So.
Yeah. I mean, like Heidi, for you, for example, mental illness is something that a lot of people in the Asian American communities don't talk about, period, right?
Yeah, I feel like some of us do, and then some of us don't talk about it, and then some of us like act like jerks because we want to make sure that we're all talking about it. I'm the latter. But I'm trying to think of like something that I wouldn't talk about. It's hard. I think that there are definitely stories that I feel like are not mine to tell, but not ones where I am the expert, not ones where I live the experience. That said, like I said earlier, I don't live the experience of like a Chinese person. I am only half, and like that half that is white is really, really white. But like mental illness is definitely something that I write about, and I definitely wrote the character that's mentally ill, that's most like me in my books that are out now, is the dad, and he's kind of sort of a villain in a way, and it's because that is sometimes how I see myself. I sometimes do not think of myself in the most sympathetic light, and I think maybe if I thought a little bit more about my audience, I might have pulled back on that, but I don't know. I think I like having written the character. I like how I wrote the character. I think it's honest to my experience. But I've heard people say like this representation of how bipolar people are like really bothers me, and like I'm sorry for hurting them. I don't want to hurt people, but I also don't want to not be honest about my own experience, if that makes sense.
Mental illness is also such, like, the way it manifests in people it's so individual from one person to another. My book deals with, you know, a girl who she's been raised surrounded by this, like, not surrounded by, but sort of like constantly suffocating under her mother's depression. And a lot of that came directly from my own childhood experience. And I was talking to a friend the other day who was like, depression doesn't manifest as like X, Y, or Z. And I was like, for some people it doesn't, but for some people it does. You know, and so that's another issue of representation being like, how do we address the fact that there's no one specific right way? I feel like to go directly back to the question you were posing, I feel this weirdness with how my family is going to perceive what I've written. Like, I feel this weird pressure from my family for like, what issues am I choosing to talk about in my books? You know, there is this whole concept of like, you don't want to lose face. So if you talk about anything negative, if you talk about something with that much of a stigma attached to it, are you like doing a disservice to your own culture, to your own people? And that's something that I have always really butt heads with. And so I feel like I would never write a story about like a girl born in China and raised in China because it's too far out of my lane. But I do think that those topics where maybe like they're not attractive topics to people of my family and my culture, I would push the boundaries a little.
That's funny because none of my characters have parents. I just realized, like they always have aunties.
That is very petty auntie.
I know they have aunties, they have grandmas, but their parents are not directly in the picture, which I think is something I have to unpack. I'm not interested in writing about like abusive Asian parents. I know it's a problem in our communities, especially like, and I know toxic masculinity is also a problem in our communities, but I'm just also not interested in writing like abusive Asian men either. I want to write about, you know, soft boys who like gardening and flowers. but also I just feel like I could never touch the subject of abusive parents without it getting co-opted by the white gaze and having it be made into something that's just like, you know, people being like, oh, well, your culture is so barbaric, because it's messy and complicated. And I think Ocean Vuong just published this beautiful piece on the New Yorker about his relationship with his mother, and how, you know, how complicated and messy it was. And I think they handled it in a very nuanced way, in a way that I don't think I could ever touch it, just because, like, I read Amy Tan in high school. I feel like she's written about it enough for me. But yeah, that's something I will never touch.
Last thing I'll note, and then we'll open to questions from the audience, is what Wendy brings up is a very interesting perspective, because it does seem like publishing has a specific agenda when it does put out Asian American stories, and sometimes the stories they want are not the stories we want to tell. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'll say something. I think a lot of publishing, they tend to want to stick to like one narrative. Like, you know, if you're an immigrant, they want you to write a story about breaking away from your family or finding your family again or something like that. Like, I feel like if I wanted to do like a girl's version of American Born Chinese by Jane Yang, like it would have been such an easy sell for me, because I want
where it goes on the shelf, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But that's just not what I want to write about. You know, I wanted to write about secondary worlds that were completely not this world, that are filled with fox people. Really, that's like when I'm drawing, I'm always thinking about what looks interesting on the page, and like, you know, if it's a Chinese influenced story with like beautiful dragon people, but people don't really know like where that goes. So, yeah.
What about you?
My take on it is that we really need more Asian Americans in publishing. specifically
I agree.
Asian Americans. I'm very fortunate in that my editor is Asian American. My editor is actually Taiwanese American, so she understands what I'm writing perfectly, and I couldn't be more grateful for that.
And that is a really rare situation.
Extremely rare, yeah. And so I have no idea how it would feel if she weren't my editor and it were someone else. So I'm kind of spoiled in that regard, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is true. Like if I were publishing with someone else, that might be something I would have to think about constantly.
I think that for me, two things conspired to make it a lot easier. One is, again, my name is Heidi Heilig, which is like so white. And two, so I don't think my editor is white, and so is my agent, and they're lovely. I love them very much. I don't know how the name read to them in the backs of their heads, in the front of their head. I don't know. I just know I've had a really good experience, and they bought the book, and they wanted the book. They've, fought for the book, and they've been really supportive through all of my screeching on Twitter about all kinds of different things. And I think that the second thing that was really, really helpful to me was actually the work of We Need Diverse Books. My book I think it was like 4 months after the book sold that We Need Diverse Books became like an official organization. And of course, that means that the work had been going on in the space for many, many months, if not years and years before that. So I think that the push was already there. So I think we're seeing a lot of change. Of course, it's like exponential, right? But of like a 0.5% of anything, still when you times it by like 10, it's still like, 1 or whatever. Like you get a lot more, but only comparatively, not a lot generally, like percentage-wise of the population.
Just numbers-wise, I think the most recent stats for Asian Americans writing books that are published by the Big Five, as far as children's book, it's about 3%, I think. And I mean, the bottom line for these statistics is that, like, if there's 100 authors who are of Asian American descent who are writing, 50 to 60 of them might be writing all white characters, which is really a startling statistic. And then on the opposite side of that, there are a lot of books about Asian American characters being written by white people. That's the other aspect of it.
Yeah, but I am grateful. I'm grateful for all the work of the people that have gone before. I would
Don't
not
quote
have
me on
done
those numbers because I'm not the most up to date.
No, no worries. I mean, but a lot of work has been done, and a lot more work needs to be done. So
when Skunk Girl came out in 2009, and I remember an editor.
I read it in 2009.
An editor in the UK read it and said, I like the book, but we already have a similar Muslim book that we published this year. And I was curious, so I looked up the book. So my book was about this Pakistani American teenager coming of age, rural upstate New York. And this was about a Palestinian Australian girl in Sydney, like completely different stories. And that was sort of what we were up against back then. And then recently, after Trump's election, I don't know if you guys saw this letter, but everyone was shocked after Trump's election. Most people didn't expect it. And Muslims are being attacked, and Trump had said, we need to ban all Muslims. And so these agents, mostly white, sent out this open call and saying, we're so upset about Trump's election, and we're trying to think of what we could do. And so Muslim authors, all you Muslim writers out there, please submit to us. We want to hear your stories. And I was talking to some other Muslim authors about it, and it was just, on the one hand, it's like, okay, that's very nice, and they're well-meaning, and it's nice to be solicited for once. But on the other hand, we've been trying to get our stories published for so long, and it takes Trump to get elected, right? We're like, it's just, and then one of the things that happened after Trump's election is that a lot of agents started getting submissions from some Muslim authors, but a lot of white authors about Muslim internment camp stories. And so these white people jumping on this bandwagon.
And there's one that's being published, actually. Right?
Yeah. And that's also frustrating because it's like that is the narrative that maybe they think is, oh, marketing thinks this is really sellable, the Muslim internment camp, and forgot, at least let a Muslim write the damn book, like, you know. So, so like Heidi was saying, like a lot of people have done a lot of good work, but we still have a long way to go.
All right, we're ready to open to audience questions. And thank you, ladies. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Hi, this is such a privilege. Thank you so much. This is a self-serving question. I teach in 7 through 12 school. And was there an adult in your life, a teacher, who said something that helped you, said something that hurt you, or said something, or you wish they had said something in terms of shaping your career as a writer?
Go, Wendy.
I mean, not to like name drop, but when I was in college, I took a class with Zadie Smith, and I would sketch comics. And I showed some of them to her, and she told me they were good. And I thought, like, maybe I should continue drawing because Zadie Smith told me I was good at art.
Okay, well, I have one. It's not Zadie Smith, but my teacher in 6th grade, Miss Pinter, had us, well, she was awesome. So one thing she did was she had reading time at the end of the day. So like from 3 to 3:30, we would ring the xylophone. One person would get the honor of ringing the xylophone every day, and then get to sit in the special reading chair, and all of us would get to read books that we picked out ourselves for fun. And then she would also have us write short stories. And so the first short story I ever wrote was for her class. And she said, "You are a writer." And I never forgot that. And I also put her in a book. It's not out yet.
I had a drama teacher in 7th grade. His name was Mr. St. John, and I still keep in touch with him. And I still call him Mr. St. John, even though he's like, "No, call me Robert." I thank him in the back of my book because he was the person who first, outside of my parents, who first believed in my writing. And we would create shows. Like, this is, I think, why I wanted to be a musical theater writer, in musical theater, instead of knowing that I wanted to be a novelist first. Because we would create shows together as like a class, and he would string them together and write them for the kids that were going to be performing. And it was just the most fun to have to work with someone who was creative and also who sort of supported my creativity as well. It made a huge impact on me. So I'm always very grateful to him, and I'm sure you have kids that will be doing the same for you.
I was really fortunate to have quite a few teachers. My fifth grade, 6th grade teacher, and my junior year of high school teacher were all extremely supportive of me being that loud student who was like, "I want to be a writer." But I remember really vividly that my 6th grade teacher was like, "We're going to make books." And what she really meant was that everybody was going to write a short story, and then we were going to print them out and staple them in book shape. But when she said, "We're going to make books," I took her so literally that I wrote, I believe it was over 100 pages, and I spent all my time doing it. And I never actually finished the story. I was like really upset that I had to turn it in before I actually finished the story. And she helped everyone make a cover, but she took like 3 extra days after school to help me really shape my cover because I had a lot of opinions about it. and like really make a book cover that felt like a book cover. Like I painted it with watercolors and everything when most other people had just printed something out. And that always stuck with me because I was like, yes, that was my first book. I wrote my first book in 6th grade.
That's so Emily of you.
It really is.
So in 11th grade, a history teacher assigned People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, which just blew my mind, and it made me realize that there is no one history and that so much is dependent on perspective. And so that just really opened my mind in ways that seem obvious now, but back then I was just blown. And then my English teacher that same year assigned us, so I was a huge Jane Eyre fan growing up, read it so many times, blah, blah. And then she assigned Wide Sargasso Sea. and which also blew my mind because I had never thought about her story, right? The mad woman in the attic. And it just made me realize that there were so many silenced voices in the world. And also, it encouraged me to become a writer, to write from these different voices.
More questions from the audience? Do you want to go ahead? Just bringing you a mic. Yeah.
Hi, I guess this is specifically for Heidi, and I guess also self-serving, but as a half-white writer of color, very specific experience, I feel like, and you've all touched on this, you're supposed to write what you know, but I found that it's hard to write what you know when you feel at certain times that you don't know yourself, and dealing with the fear of trying to figure out who you are in the process of writing and seeing how people will react to that. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that experience of, I guess, sort of like knowing yourself through your writing and also thinking about how people will like react to your, I don't know, identity with your culture and yeah.
Gosh, that's like a lot though, Like it's okay. But that's the thing. Identity is always a lot, and like all of us, I think, struggle with it in a lot. I think a lot of people that are not like mainstream, like cis straight white men, basically, struggle with identity in a lot of ways, and I think. I don't want to say like us like mixed like two culture kids or like one foot in one world kids. I don't want to say that like we're special in one way because I think a lot of people have similar experiences in that, especially in America, they're very, the majority of us have relatives that were from not this soil. So I think it's weird, my character in my book is like really Hamlet-esque in that way, like just thinking a lot about like and torn between like lots of things, and I think that can be. It carried me through 2 books, so you can explore that on the page. You don't have to know, in a way, the answers to write down the questions and to explore the questions. And I encourage you to start by exploring those questions on the page, and maybe you'll get to some answers for yourself, and maybe like if you are writing YA, for example, maybe your character doesn't need the answers yet. Maybe there are still answers to come as they grow. But either way, I do recommend just getting it down on the page and exploring as you work. And good luck. Tell me if you figure anything out.
More questions? Yes. Sir, right there. Have been chosen.
Oh, sorry about that. Hi, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. You had a very informative talk, and I actually had a question. Throughout the conversation, you brought up how sometimes it was very difficult to talk about experiences outside of your immediate identity or outside of your immediate understandings. And as an amateur writer myself, I find that sometimes the biggest criticisms and the strongest critiques I get are when I do that. So when I go over, let's say, a gender or racial line, and I want to know if it's, what advice would you have? Do you think that's like perhaps a taboo that we should probably stay away from, or do you think it all depends on the delivery? Thank you.
Can I go first? Okay, so my 2 books, they're about ballerinas at a cutthroat Manhattan Ballet Academy. One of the characters is white, one of the characters is black, and one of the characters is Korean American. There's no South Asian character in that book. 0. And I get that question all the time, like, why didn't you put an Indian girl in that book? But it wouldn't have served that setting, because when you look at these ballet conservatories, there's a lot of East Asian dancers. There's not a lot of South Asian dancers, and we wanted to stay true to that. But I think that from the feedback I've gotten about the Korean American character, she works. And I think the reason she works is there's still so much of me and my writing partner Danielle in that character. She always feels neither here nor there, which I think is a very Asian American experience, period, no matter what your actual specific background is. And a lot of her emotional experiences are things that I've drawn from my own life. So I think that as long as you put the truth in that character, even if it's not exactly, it doesn't look like you, the emotional truth and the specific details, those build out the character. And I always say the universal, the relatable thing is in those specific details. So I think the emotional core has to be there. And you have to build her out like a real character no matter what you're writing, or him, or whoever it is. The elf, you know, same thing. Anybody else?
You can, in addition to that, if you're writing outside your lane, if you're writing a character who you do not live and embody in your own demographic, you can also do your due diligence and interview people, talk to friends, talk to as many people as you can, and really try to dive deep into understanding that experience. I think the most important thing is being able to take a step back and be like, where is my privilege maybe causing me to have a facet that maybe I'm not understanding properly, and how can I understand that, not to write necessarily about that specific thing, but just to make sure that I'm not overstepping in anything else.
There's an essay by Jacqueline Woodson. She's a children's writer who's very well loved. And she says that she can tell when somebody has been writing about a community, but they haven't come in and sit at her table. Essentially, that's what she says. And I always add, like, I want you to have held the babies. So if you're writing something about a community that's not your own, I think thinking about why, the why of why you want to tell that story is really critical. And the gaze that you're approaching it with, too. Anybody else? More questions? Joshua?
First of all, thank you guys so much. This has been awesome. Secondly, I'm actually curious about the reverse. I feel like in our communities, we talk a lot about writing marginalizations outside our lane. So, for example, writing characters from ethnic backgrounds that are not our own, who are not white. But I'm 7 or 8 different kinds of marginalized. I'm never going to write a character who's marginalized in every single way that I am. But I also find it almost impossible, for example, to write a neurotypical character. So for those of you who have, like Heidi, I know, has written a character who is not bipolar. I know that you've written some white characters. What is that experience like, and how is that different from the experience of writing marginalized characters who are outside of your lane?
For me, I'm talking too much. For me, people will assume, if you do not really push it out there, people will assume, they'll default to typical. They'll default to even if you put small hints in there, usually people will just skim right past it unless they're looking. So for me, I feel like I had to mention like mania and depression on the page for it to be sure that, like, certain that he was actually bipolar and not just a drug addict. So, you know, and still people are like, oh, he's bipolar, and I'm like, yeah. So, you know, I think that there's such a desire for people to just not notice us, that they may just not notice if you don't put it blatantly on the page. I'm not sure. Like, it's weird. In every reader's mind, they will see something a little different, and unless you really make it clear, so far at least at this time, I think people will just default to something that maybe you didn't intend.
I feel like it's kind of like the Rue issue in the Hunger Games, where when the movie came out, people were really taken aback that the character was cast as black. But it's on the page very briefly, very, very briefly in the book. But it's not, there's no nuance to it. And I think that putting the nuance in and like putting yourself into that experience in all the ways that it, like the microaggressions that a character of that background would experience. I think those are the things, when you put them on the page, that's what drives home what the character's experience is.
It's really interesting in drawing comics because I think you have to show it kind of in the art. But like, there's all kinds of debate. You know, how do you draw X ethnicity properly without resorting to like, you know, caricature? But like, it's difficult. Like we have a character in Mooncakes who wears hearing aids, and my writing partner, who is also hard of hearing, she told me, she was like, well, normally they're not that big, but if we don't make it really obvious and if we don't like give it a bright color, like people aren't gonna notice, which I thought was really interesting, which was something I had never considered before. But because like I've seen the big ones, but like not. But those aren't the modern ones. Like the modern ones are really small and unassuming. So that was interesting.
I actually have a question for you guys. Do you have any, because you're talking about writing outside your own identity, and you mentioned writing white people, but do you guys have any problems writing cis straight white people? Because I usually don't, just 'cause I feel like that's what I grew up in. Like that's the world I know so well.
We live in their world.
It, right.
Yeah.
So in terms of that specific group, I never really.
Have you ever been accused of getting their white people wrong? Because, you know, I have, yes.
Not yet.
Don't read your Amazon reviews.
But I know that there are authors who won't write outside their own identity, partly because some of them are nervous that they, you know, will be criticized for not authentically representing whatever community it is. And I don't know if that's necessarily the way to go either. It's a very complicated issue, the issue of identity and representation in writing.
And it's also like a question of story. I feel like that's what gets left out sometimes. Sometimes there's certain characters don't fit certain stories, and like, so like I have a book that's not out yet. Nobody take this idea. It's called The Venus Boy Trap, and it's about Venus coming to Earth to help a girl get the guy. She's a geeky girl and she wants this guy, and then of course the guy falls for Venus, and like, so the lead character is white because putting an Indian character in as that character, it would have just loaded it with so much more. I do have Indian characters in that book, but I think it would just be so heavy with other things, and it's supposed to be a fun, quirky concept and a light read, and I think I don't want to put all that baggage in. But the girl who's the Indian character, she's the popular girl, and she does talk about body hair, just so you know. Yeah. More questions, guys? Yes, sir, back there.
Sheba, your characters, they grow up in a lot of bilingual households. So how do you decide when to insert Urdu words and phrases into the text? And then what do you do to make sure that your non-South Asian audiences understand what you're talking about?
That is a good question.
Yeah, you try not to use too many because you don't want to alienate non-Urdu speaking readers. But then you want to have some because you want it to feel authentic. And it also depends. I know there are some South Asian parents who primarily talk to their children in English, but it depends on what your characters are like. So, I mean, there are certain words, like, for example, in my 2018 book, on the road trip, the boy brings along his lota, right, which is like a water vessel that you clean yourself with after you use the restroom that Muslims use. And it's a lota, like there's no other word you can use for it, really. So there's sometimes there is only one word that you can use. And then you try to, when you use an Urdu word or word in another language, you try to use it in a way that if you don't know what it means, you can figure out from the context of the sentence. But I was reading, I'm blanking on his name. Who is the Dominican author who... he has no qualms, right? And I also love that about his writing, that he just immerses you completely. It doesn't matter if you understand completely what the Spanish is or not. So it's like a sprinkle, not a shower, I'd say.
Did you have any issues in the editorial process with that, like deciding?
My editor is here, actually, somewhere. Hi.
Hey, Rosemary.
Yeah. So she's She's my lovely supportive editor. She's let me use all the Urdu words that I wanted to use, but if it isn't clear, like from the context what it means, then she'll point that out, which is really helpful. But in my book, there's a lot of Urdu poetry, but I just basically use the English translations, and I don't bother putting in the Urdu because, that it was anyway that the level of Urdu poetry that registers hard for a lot of speakers to understand. So,
More questions? We're all set? Oh, here's another one. Yes.
Thank you so much for the really awesome discussion. I wanted to push back a little bit on the idea of only writing within your space because white writers have been doing the other thing for a long time. So I would love to see a Chinese character by you before I would see a white author do it. But I would be interested to know what character you would like to see out there, like either one that you wrote or something you would like to see out there that you haven't seen yet, that would help round out this quite slim space so far.
More aunties.
Yes, for all the aunties, please.
More petty aunties, please.
By the way, Wendy has a line of petty auntie goodies that you can find online.
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah. Thank you, Sona.
Because I have bought all the things. So.
Oh my God, thank you. I have a Threadless store. It's artofwendyxu.threadless.com. I have shirts that say petty auntie on them.
Everyone's gonna own one of those, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to see more stories about South Asian characters who are not middle class or upper middle class, because I feel like most of the stories tend to be in that range.
That's true. Yeah. Guys in the middle?
I'm like struggling because I honestly just want more of everything with Asian American characters. I can't even pin down one specific concept. We need more so that people aren't pinning us into a specific corner all the time.
I definitely agree with that. I think that for me, I'd like to see characters because fantasy is my jam. I love fantasy. I'm like such a nerd about that. So I would love to see more. I love that there is a lot of Southeast Asian and Indian fantasy coming out and being worked on right now, but
very slowly.
I'd love to see more of that. I'd also like to see more intersectional, race plus something else, gender queer or any queer really, or insane or any of us, the rest of us that are also Asian in some way. I'd like to see those characters more in fantasy because I feel like we have some characters that I feel like sometimes people are like, oh, that's an issue book. It has to only be an issue topic, and that can only be contemporary. We can't believe that a character would be Asian and bipolar and magical. No, just magical. So I'd like to see more of that, more of all the people in all the things, all the ways.
Yeah, I think there's still, I think, a culture of issue books happening, and I think it's being reinforced by what is doing well as well. Publishing is a business after all, but to see more of us get to be the hero or the heroine or the non-binary person, protagonist of something that is not where identity isn't the sole story. I think that is really critical, and I think that's starting to happen more. So that's refreshing. Additional questions? Oh, there's more. Okay. Yes?
Hi.
Hello.
So this is also somewhat self-serving. Mm-hmm. So as an editor, I would love to know what is one easy thing you guys think publishers could be doing better or in a more supportive way? Obviously, end goal, hire more people of color, but that's a really difficult end goal. So like, what's one sort of easier incremental step you think publishers could take?
I have so many opinions. I think you guys should go first. Somebody else start.
I've recently seen a call by bloggers, like the diverse book bloggers hashtag, asking for books to go to more bloggers of color or bloggers that are have marginalized identities. I think that could help if publishers work with them more directly, because it would. I don't know a lot about the business side of publishing, so I'm sure that sending ARCs to people is very expensive. But if you have, extra ARCs lying around or places that you don't know where to send them to, working with diverse book bloggers might also not only help raise the book's profile, but also help raise the blogger's profile, which could then create a better review community, which would uplift sort of, rising tide, all boats, all that.
I think that, oh my god, I totally lost my train of thought. I think that, there he goes. I think soliciting from writers of color is really, really important. Like, it makes someone feel good when an editor approaches them to be like, have you considered publishing something? Have you considered submitting to us? Like, a lot of times I think the process is very intimidating for people, especially people who just don't know where to start. And I think in our communities, there's just a really big dearth of resources for especially younger writers. Like, they don't know where to submit, they don't know, how to get an agent. So having regular reaching out, like that would be super helpful.
I agree with what you said just now, Wendy. In fact, one of the really buzzed about books that's coming up next month is called When Dimple Met Rishi. It's by Sandhya Menon. And it started out as an in-house IP project, intellectual property, at Simon & Schuster. So the editor came up with the concept and then found a writer of Indian descent to write the story, because the editor had really close friends who were Desi growing up, and she wanted a story like that. But she knew she had to find the right person to write it. And so things like that, a lot of those opportunities tend to go to straight, white, cisgendered writers all across the board. So I think that when publishing is doing those kinds of opportunities, to look at how they can diversify those stories without making the story specifically about being Indian or whatever background, marginalized community the writer's from. I think that's a really critical way to expand what's being put out. And then also, a conversation I've had with some editors previously has been about the marketing aspect of things, because sometimes these books will get bought and then the writer's sort of left floundering. And that happens to all writers, no matter what your background is, because there's so many books and apparently so little marketing money. But, giving those books that extra push that they can really use, I think, is critical. And I think that's something that some editors are starting to think about now.
Piggybacking off of that, I think that oftentimes when those books do get marketing, they get put in just the school and library sector. They're an educational book because it's giving you a window into another country or another culture, right? Because they don't belong here.
It's an issue book.
Yeah, it becomes an issue book. And why can't publishers be talking about these books in the exact same ways that they're talking about books written by these cis-het white males? Why can't they give the books the same type of marketing they would give any other mainstream book without necessarily, it's crucial that we're having these conversations around diversity right now. But I would love for us to reach a point where we don't need these conversations because this is just the norm. Like, it actually reflects the people who populate this very diverse country. So why are publishers making that distinction constantly? Like, can they strive to elevate a book and really give it the marketing and publicity that they would for someone of a different identity?
I think there was one.
Oh yeah, this just came up in my head because this is something that people are doing anyway. Like in a book, I know in a book like mine, there are maps inside, and they are drawn by artists. And as far as I can tell, all those artists are white. I didn't really it's hard sometimes to Google all of them, but I know that there are some artists of color that keep databases of marginalized artists that draw things. I think Nyla Magruder does one. She has a database. So if you're ever looking for art inside a book that you're going to commission, even just commissioning someone from a marginalized background might just give that little extra boost to both the author and the commission, the artist. That's right.
And Harper, for our book, they used audio people from the background of each character for the characters, which is impressive. There was 3 lead narrators, and they hired people specifically. And I think a lot of publishers are doing that. They're being thoughtful about that now. Wendy, did you have something now? Yeah.
Also, paying people is really important, I think. Nothing shows that you appreciate someone's, manuscript. Like, we will give you good money for it. Because a lot of these books by marginalized authors are getting sought and bought, at least in comics, and their creators are getting paid a pittance, and it's a shame because it just feels cheap when you say we want your books, but we don't want to give you a fair price for them.
Are we all set? Any other questions? There's one more. Okay, this is the last one.
Hi. I was wondering what the process was like for you, and if finding an agent was what the journey was like for you, if you chose agents that you felt would be more receptive to diverse perspectives, and how that process was.
That is a good question, too. All right, Sheba, let's start with you.
So my process was actually very easy and intuitive because we had agents who would come visit our MFA program, and they would on the bulletin board they'd post their photo and some information about them, and then there was a sign-up sheet where you'd have 15 or 20 minute individual meetings with them, and you'd share your work and talk a bit about it. And so the first agent that came my first year of the MFA program, I saw her. It's Aisha Pandey. I saw her on the bulletin board, and I had this voice in my head that said, "Oh, she's meant to be your agent." And then I met, and that's it's easy breezy.
I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, oh, I wrote this book, and I was like, I'll just put it on Wattpad. My mom was like, no, Heidi, you should try to get an agent. I was like, fine. So I looked at Query Tracker, and I chose 15 people because they accepted email submissions and did historical and fantasy. And it was 15, whatever the first top 15 people in the search came up for those 3 things, and I queried them, and then I got a couple responses, and I chose the one that I liked best. Don't do that.
But that's pretty.
It worked out,
yeah.
but it was luck. So much of it's luck.
I guess I wasn't thinking so much about my identity and how it related to my book and publishing when I queried agents, and I really just picked agents based on who to query based on who represented books that I loved, and I feel if I were, and I adore my agent, but if I were to query, and the other thing is that at the time my agent was heavily involved with We Need Diverse Books. He was reading for the first Walter grant, and I was very keenly aware of that. I was definitely watching who was supportive of diverse voices, and who had made a point of it, who had expressed that they were looking for diverse voices. But I think if I were querying all over again now, I probably, with the conversation that it exists now constantly, maybe I would look for people who would directly understand my identity and prioritize them first. But I love my agent, so I don't know. It's really tough.
Sona bullied me into getting an agent.
and your specific one.
And my specific agent. I was fresh out of college, and I had a friend interning at an agency and told me to pitch them, and I did, but unfortunately that agent did not work out. And in comics, with the work that I want to do, which is half my own independent work that I put online for free for people to read, it was very important to have an agent who would respect that and not want to help me negotiate for everything. So when that first agent pairing fell through, I was just like, I'm not going to get an agent because I don't need one. And Sona was like, yes, you do.
So you want to get paid.
Yes. So my current agent, I met through Sona and a bunch of people that we know, and she's also a woman of color, and it was really important. That was really important for me, that she know like what I'm about and what my projects are about.
So I'm on my second agent, and the first one, it was a very intense, very long, drawn-out experience that I would not repeat, where my writing partner and I rewrote, and it just never sort of hit what she was looking for, and to the point where we were like, clearly we're looking for different things. And then we queried again after that. We picked maybe 10 people that we really had heard good things about and who sort of represented the kind of work that we wanted to do. And we had 3 offers, but I think the critical thing when you're looking at an agent relationship is to know what kind of partnership you're looking for, because it's sort of like a marriage. And for the first agent, it was like they were the parent and we were the child, and I don't do well with that. And so with my current agent, it's very collaborative. She's very frank and honest, and she trusts my judgment as much as I trust hers, which I think is really what I wanted. And people go through agents a lot. You're not going to be married to them forever necessarily. Really hounding this marriage metaphor, but it is something you might end up sharing projects with them forever, like children. So, choose wisely.
I want to add one more thing, which is that I think, in addition to that, one really crucial thing is, if you're going the route of searching for specifically agents of color, for example, and let's say you go through all of them and none of them understand the vision of your book, I think that you should really be searching for an agent who you'll have that mind meld with, where they understand your vision. That was why I picked my agent, because when we spoke on the phone, he had he felt like an extension of my brain. I was like, that's creepy. He knows my book better than me and can practically live in my head, and so I think if you're trying to figure out who to query and you're sort of looking at the identities out there, we keep talking about how we want to support people of color in every aspect of this industry, but your agent they're the first gatekeeper and they're the ones who present your work. So I would say even more crucial is that vision match.
Although there are some really awesome agents of color out there now who are actively building lists and looking for diverse voices specifically. I think we're good to go. The last question, I will throw this out, is name a book by a diverse author that you guys are reading and loving right now. And it can be Sheba's book. Wendy, go.
Okay. I got a Galley of Force of 1,000 Lanterns by Julie Dow, and it's a retelling of Snow White's Evil Queen, which I love, and it's a Chinese fantasy-based retelling of Snow White's Evil Queen, and I just fell in love with this horrible, evil, selfish protagonist who knows she's vain and self-serving and messy, and that is just so great.
You want me to come back to you, Emily?
Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought for a second.
A book that you're reading and loving now, diverse.
Oh, right. I'm not going to say much about it because not much is out in the world about it, and I don't know how she's going to react to me talking about it, but one of my critique partners is Aisha Saeed, and I have been reading chapters from her new upcoming middle grade book.
So I'm not able to read anything good right now because I'm trying to wrestle with my own work, but a couple months ago I read Library of Fates by Aditi Khurana. It's great. It's got some time travel. It's got a sweeping love story. It's got sacrifice and messy parents, and all this stuff. So I really recommend it. It's a standalone. It's fantasy. It's great. I blurbed it. I got to read it early, so I really am happy about that. Anyway, pick it up. I really recommend it.
So in terms of diverse YA, I just finished Aristotle and Dante Discover the Mysteries of the Universe, which is about these two Mexican-American teenagers in the 80s in El Paso, Texas, who become best friends and then fall in love with each other, and it's a very beautiful book.
So I have 3 because I can't contain myself. The first is Nicola Yoon's The Sun Is Also a Star, which came out last year. If you haven't read it, it was nominated for the National Book Award. Please read it. It's beautiful. And then Jenny Han just issued the final installment of her series, which is delicious. And it also features a half white, half Korean character. So I think that's really worth picking up. And I'm 50 pages into Sheba's book, and there's pie and cute boys and Urdu poetry, and what more could you ask for, really? All right, on that note, thank you guys so much for coming. Really appreciate it, especially the heat.